Welcome to Women Disrupting, the podcast that amplifies the voices of women who refuse to wait for change. I'm Yasmin Arif, your impatient host. Together, we'll confront injustice, share bold stories, and spark actionable solutions. Ready to disrupt the status quo? Let's ignite it right now. Today, I'm joined by Hannah Wilson, founder of The Belonging Effect, formerly known as Diverse Educators. With over 20 years' experience in education and inclusion work, Hannah supports organisations across sectors to move beyond good intentions and create cultures where people genuinely feel they belong. In this episode, we talk about why belonging is the outcome, not the starting point of the work she does. The importance of building confidence and consciousness before changing policies or curriculum, and how to navigate fear, resistance, and uncomfortable conversations with compassion and courage. Hannah brings deep insight, honesty, and practical wisdom to this conversation, and I'm really excited to share it with you. Okay, right. Hannah Wilson, welcome to Women Disrupting Podcast. How are you?
I'm really good. Thank you for having me.
Good. You are the founder of The Belonging Effect, formerly Diverse Educators, a name change that's been quite recent. So before we start to talk about diversity and inclusion, just tell us a little bit about what The Belonging Effect is.
Sure. So I spent 20 years teaching and leading in schools, state schools, academies, academy trusts. And I was always quite involved in what I call the grassroots scene as a volunteer. Like my passion project is diversity, equity, inclusion and belonging. So I got involved in speaking events, blogging, just in the conversations, I guess, because there wasn't really any guidance or influence coming from the system or from the influences in the system, such as the DfE. So we kind of took it into our own hands. So I was the co-founder of Women Ed 10 years ago. And then Diverse Ed kind of spawned out of that because we had all of these different grassroots groups for a single issue. But a lot of my team coexisted in 4 or 5 of those groups. We had a conversation about intersectionality. So we started Diverse Ed as an intersectional grassroots community space 8 years ago. And then when I left Headship, I wasn't really planning on making it into a training provider or into a business, but it's what the world needed. There's those moments in time where we went into lockdown, George Floyd was murdered. Suddenly, the world wakes up, but the school system, I think, woke up to the fact that we need to do more and we need to be better. So suddenly we got asked to do a lot more than we've been planning to do. So we became a training provider. So we were called Diverse Educators, but this year we have rebranded as The Belonging Effect to really make it clear that we don't just work in education anymore. The name educators was actually becoming an inhibitor. And I get emails all the time saying, can you work with us? And yes, we can. And teachers, as you know, are brilliant trainers. And whenever we work in any other sector, we get such amazing feedback. So it's about removing the barrier to make our reach, I guess, even bigger.
I wondered whether that was the reason. And yeah, that makes absolute sense now because there's a demand for it, not just within the education sector. Right. So when you say it was during lockdown, when all those kind of catalysts came about and there was more of a need for it, can you be a bit more specific around what some of the things were that made you think, oh my goodness, there's a real need for this?
Sure. Pre-lockdown, there was awareness, but the awareness often sat with the person with the lived experience. And there was people seeking their community, their network, their peer support, primarily in education, to stay in the system and to have that kind of that mutual understanding, I guess, of the barriers they were navigating. Whereas I think the difference for me post George Floyd's murder and it happening in lockdown was that the people who perhaps it wasn't impacting could no longer deny it was happening. And particularly around race and anti-racism, I think there was a lot of people who were quite comfortable in their denial or their ignorance about the inequities in the world when it comes to race. And because it all happened and played out in such a public way, globally, on social media, on mainstream media, people couldn't escape it. So I'll give you an example. I hosted virtual events every long term, and we had a virtual event planned in June before it all happened. And I normally get about 1,000 people to an event. We had 13,500 people join us for a Saturday grassroots free event. And I had people sat in their lounges watching it with their partner, their children. It was all ages, it was kind of appropriate to. People were having these conversations at home, not just about race, but I think race became very centred in that moment. But it also then opened out who else is marginalised, who else is disempowered, who else is experiencing a lack of belonging in the world or in society or in the workplace right now. So I feel like I've just seen this massive shift since that moment. And once you know it and you've heard it and you've seen it, you can't unknow it and unsee it and unhear it. So I feel like that's what's then created the momentum over the last few years.
Got you. And when you go in and deliver training to these different organisations, I know it might look different, but is there a common theme that employers are asking for?
It's a really interesting thing to track. Like, we've been going for 8 years and watching like what requests we have coming in and which sessions get the most traction. I think it's quite reflective of what's going on in society in that period of time. So, Dream, some of our most popular sessions are a kind of a rudimentary introduction to DEIB, where we really talk through the Equality Act and the protected characteristics, and we create shared understanding and shared language, because actually that you need to have that shared foundation of all staff in a school or in a setting understanding it. And then off the back of that, we then might go off in different directions based on the needs of their community. So they might want some work on unconscious bias or challenging derogatory language or disrupting microaggressions, quite behavioural and cultural things. Holding courageous conversations is a really popular one. Or they might want to do some work on the curriculum, diversifying the curriculum, increasing representation in the curriculum. They might want to look at their policies and reviewing the inclusion and the equity in their policies. So we often start with like all staff, and then sometimes we might go up and do the governors, we might do the curriculum leaders, we might work the pastoral team. It kind of depends where the interest is in an institution, but also, I guess, like what is happening for them as a community in that moment of time, because they can often feel quite overwhelmed that they need to do it all and they need to do it all now. But we have to help them curate it into an ongoing conversation as well.
And when you go in and deliver this training, what are the overall responses that you get from, I guess, the team members, the people that you're delivering this training to? And I guess what I'm trying to get at here, Hannah, is talk to me a little bit about, is there resistance, or are people genuinely just quite open and want to learn about this? What do you find?
Yeah, really good question. I think it depends who's booked it and why they've booked it. So I've had some tricky deliveries where it's mandatory training because they've had a complaint or they've had a poor inspection result, and it's very reactive training and they're being told they have to engage. And there will always be people in the room who do want to engage, but you do have the folded arms, eye rollers, people who perhaps don't want to engage. But I'd say the majority of the time we're talking to we're practicing, what's the expression I'm looking for? We're preaching to the converted that there's already an interest. They've already done some work and they want to extend it and deepen it. And I think the consistent feedback we get, I've got 15 people who run training for me officially, all different associates from different backgrounds, different experiences, leadership journeys. We get consistent feedback that I think our USP is we create really safe spaces. So thinking about our shared work as coaches, like we create really safe spaces that we hold, that we don't go in judgmental, we don't go in to tell people what to think or tell people what to do. We facilitate a really open and honest and authentic conversation where we are encouraging them to build psychological safety, but then to have those courageous conversations. And we are willing to be vulnerable and share who we are and the journey we've walked, and that gives permission to them. So like I always do a social contract at the start of every training session about like how we're going to show up and how we're going to interact. And I think there's things that our coaching practice then creates to create that safety. And we get beautiful feedback from people who weren't expecting it to be so deep or so profound, or to have so many people contributing who they thought weren't going to contribute. So yes, there is resistance, but less than you'd perhaps think.
And in terms of success measures, I guess, can you share a little bit about what does it look like when you've delivered training and done your work and you see success? What is your interpretation of this has had an impact?
It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because people are a nightmare at filling in a feedback form. So we always set out the feedback form. I always chase for somebody to fill it in, like just to affirm the trainer that they've done a good job, but also for us to go back and tweak our content. I think one of the success measures or impact measures for us as a small business is that like we get repeat bookings and we get word of mouth referrals. So between it's landing well when people are willing to recommend you, but also they come back for further training. And we've got really long-standing relationships now with partner schools, trusts, teaching school hubs. We've literally worked with them for 3 or 4 years. I had a call yesterday from the CEO. You know that thing you did 4 years ago? We've got a new school. Can you come in on that training again? So you become quite trusted, like partners, I guess, that there's so much fear and anxiety around the topic and also over who's delivering it and how they're going to deliver it. I think that collaborative mutual partnership's really important. And I guess then the other impact is the impact it has on the staff. So we do quite a lot of work that develops and supports staff, but also retains them. So if we're helping them to buck their attrition rates in their staff body, or we're helping them to increase representation in who they recruit. So I guess it's like there's different things that you measure to show the impact. And I think one of the biggest questions I get asked is like, how do you measure belonging, or how do you measure DEIB? It's quite a hard thing to measure because it's quite cultural and it's not necessarily always palpable. Whereas I think that's why so many settings are doing the curriculum work, because it's visible and it's tangible and they feel like they're making a difference because you can see you're doing it. I just fear how many settings are diving into the curriculum work without the training to have the consciousness of who they are when they're doing the curriculum work, because I think sometimes there's really good intent, but you can actually be doing further harm as opposed. So I think there's things there to unpick as well.
Tell me a little bit more about that. Like how, that's an interesting idea that they go in with good intent, but you could be doing more harm.
I can't remember what subject you are.
I'm English. I'm an English teacher. Okay. Yeah, are you too?
Yeah. I thought we had that in common.
Yeah.
So, hey, if I give you some examples of well-intentions that perhaps aren't having the impact they desire. So I've worked in English departments with brilliant teachers, but we were 10 women. We were all white. We were all straight, working in boys' schools with very diverse families. So we could go away and do the reading and update our schemes of work, but have we been equipped to then hold the conversations about what we need to understand in the classroom, the language we should and shouldn't use? So I worry sometimes, and I call this out in quite a lot of my training, we talk about developing consciousness, confidence, and competence. And I think the bias for action in education is people jump to doing the competence bit, but they're not conscious of who they are or confident they're doing it right. So they could spend hours like changing a book and changing a scheme of work, but they're still the same people doing that delivery. So they although they've consciously diversified, have they redecolonized who they are and how they are behaving and their classroom environment and their classroom behaviours? So I think it's that bit that people sometimes miss. They go for the superficial, surface level, performative kind of piece, which is better than what they were doing. But like, if we know some of the politics around some of the texts that we probably both taught for Key Stage 4 English Lit, people are still teaching them and they're saying words in classrooms that are harmful. They should not be saying them out loud. So it's things like that I think we have to be conscious of. It's not necessarily about taking the book off the curriculum. It's about retraining the staff on how to deliver it in a way that is not going to harm the children in the classroom.
Yeah. Okay. No, I get you. Yeah. And as you're talking there, like even linking back to what you said, people have got a lot of fear and anxiety around this kind of thing. That kind of came up for me, was like, oh God, it feels so shameful sometimes when you get it wrong, that you're just like, you almost cringe at yourself, or there's a fear like, I've really upset that person and I shouldn't have said that. So how do you work with staff, or, not just from the education sector, just kind of like deal with that feeling?
Yeah, I know. It's a really interesting one, isn't it? Because like what I often say to people is we have to give ourselves and others permission and compassion to make mistakes. That actually you're never going to get it right. So don't wait until you've done all the reading and all the learning and you think you're in a perfect state to do it. You're still going to make mistakes. It's better to have a go, get it wrong, get some feedback and keep moving. But it's how we acknowledge and own what we get wrong along the way. So I quite often use examples of when I've got it wrong when I'm doing training, for example, because we're all guilty. So we do quite a lot of work on how to build psychological safety, but also how to hold courageous conversations. I'm sure you've read Kim Scott's Radical Candor. Like, that's one of the models I use quite a lot, about how we balance care and challenge, and how we can challenge with care. And are we having the conversations about the things we should be talking about, or are we avoiding those conversations? And I think that there is a massive fear about having conversations about things we feel ill-equipped to talk about, or things that we feel are personal themes rather than professional themes. But how we disconnect those two, I do not know. So like, not talking about race in any workplace actually isn't helping anyone, because there will be racial power dynamics within those different settings. And when we talk about race, that's one of the most sensitive ones at the moment. I think it comes up, like people not knowing what language they can and can't use. And like I run training for a white majority group of teachers online in the Southwest. And they'll say, oh, Hannah, you just said the word black. Are we allowed to say the word black? I'm like, yes, we're allowed to say the word black, but they're still operating on a different version of the language we shouldn't be using. Well, what word would you use? I don't know what word I'd use. And I think it's having the conversation about the language in order to establish the language so we can have the conversations. I think the lack of language is often the barrier to having the quality conversations.
Yeah, no, that makes absolute sense for sure. I'm just thinking about some examples, and I was gonna get you to grapple them with me, but actually I'm going to move on from that because I can't even remember them clearly, and I don't want to put my foot in it. But again, it's that.
Let me give you some examples, because when I'm doing the training on challenging derogatory language, I give them examples of language that jars me, and then I often ask the room to say, what language jars you? Like words that are either like out of date or being used in a particular way. And there's a couple of phrases that when you become conscious of what they mean or what their etymology are, like I've stopped using them. So one of the examples I use is nitty gritty. So quite a lot of people will casually talk about, let's get down to the nitty gritty. And someone brought to my awareness a few years ago what that term means and where it comes from. And I've stopped using it because actually it comes from slavery. It comes from colonialism. It's a French word about bodies in a slave ship. And like your face is, you can't see it on the podcast, but your face is saying it all. Like when you know that, and when you then Google it and you read around it, I wouldn't use that term now. And when I catch myself about to use it, I stop myself. But other people will use that phrase around me. And depending on who I am and where I am, I often say, oh, I'm really curious to use that phrase. Can I just share something with you that I read? And they are horrified. And then they stop using it. The other one that we use quite a lot in the UK is Chinese whispers. When you Google what that means, again, really problematic. It's racially coded. So we've got these phrases we've used historically, and sometimes we have to like stop and pause and think, actually, is there a better way of saying that? Because it's a shortcut, isn't it, to sharing some information? But when you realise there's a problematic history to where that phrase comes from, you can then find better words to use.
Those examples were so much better than the ones I would have given because they're so much more subtle. Like the ones that I wouldn't have even thought of, mine were a bit more obvious. Yeah, that's fascinating. It really is. And it makes you think. And I love learning stuff like this so that I can reflect and then manage how I speak. However, there is undeniably pushback in all sectors, but in education, I'm probably more familiar with it, around diversity and inclusion not being necessary, being fluff, and being, maybe it's people label it more right-wing thinking, but again, that's kind of divisive in itself, isn't it? So how do you handle that sort of narrative that this is just people say it's getting too much, it's putting more stress on people, it's unnecessary?
It's a really interesting question, and it's been quite a focus point for me with the rebrand. So I'll go backwards to go forward. So if we think about the acronyms we use, like historically people will talk about D&I, diversity inclusion, then EDI, equality, diversity, inclusion, then DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. And then like 4 or 5 years ago, people started putting a B on the end for belonging or a J on the end for justice, social justice. That's used more in like the international sector. So we evolved and started using DEIB a good 5 years ago. But we talk about those four concepts in relation to one another. So I talk about D plus E plus I equals B. B is the outcome. It's how we feel. But we can't just do the B and forget about the D, the E, and the I. And that's what's happening a lot at the moment. People feel like the D, the E, and the I is too political or too charged or too difficult or too uncomfortable. So they're not doing it and they're just talking about the B. And I call that putting a plaster on the problem. Like that's where it's got a little bit fluffy, a little bit superficial. But my company is obviously called Belonging Effect. But I've made it very clear why we're called Belonging Effect and how we are doing the work on all of those different components. But I have had some pushback that some people think we've sold out by changing our company name from Diverse Educators to Belonging Effect, that we've become too commercially minded, which really isn't the case. And I've written a long blog about why we changed our name. Then I wrote a blog last week or the week before that went, it was a bit Marmite on LinkedIn, because we're seeing more and more white men talk about belonging. Because whereas they can't talk about D, E, and I, because it's quite far removed from their lived experience, we've now got some quite significant thought leaders talking about belonging, but talking about belonging through the lens of quite a powerful and privileged position. And they are completely negating and ignoring the need for D, E, and I. So I wrote a blog about it, just like, I'm just really curious that, like, are we talking about belonging? Are we talking about equity? How do these ideas interrelate? And I got called out for, but you're a straight white woman with a company called Belonging. So like, it was an interesting kind of like fallout of, I might be a straight white woman talking about belonging, but I'm talking about belonging in conjunction to and as an outcome of. Whereas some people see that, like, who am I to be running a business for DEIB, and who am I to be talking about belonging? So it's an interesting debate.
It is, isn't it? Yeah, this is the thing. I guess what do you, well, you've already said how you sort of defend that stance, but like, how does that show up for you running your business? Like, do you, like, to what extent do you start having doubts in what you're doing?
Well, it's an interesting one. I've got a really good team. Our team, between us, I think we hold all the protected characteristics. So as a team, we're really representative and we're really intersectional. And I've got different people I call to talk about different things, and like vice versa. And a lot of them saw some of the critique on the blog that came out. But we all stand fast on what we believe in and what we do and why we do it and how we do it. And we have a lot of integrity and a lot of ethics in how we do our work. So like I've got quite thick skin. I'm quite resilient, I think, to criticism. And I will always listen to feedback, but I don't have to act on it. Like, I think it's that, isn't it? That I'm not going to shut my business down. Like, I think there is a need for people with majority identity to be part of the conversation, but I'm very mindful of who I am in different spaces. I do leverage my power quite a lot. I hold a lot of people to account. So like, they ask to speak at events, and it's like an all-white female lineup, and I'll say, I won't speak at your event unless you get better representation. So I'm very conscious that I sometimes get the invitation because of who I am. But when I talk about these topics, I can speak to 2/3 of the room, particularly in education, because white women are the majority group. And my call to action is, all of you need to take responsibility for this as well. Like, there's a great phrase, it doesn't have to happen to you to matter to you. And I get asked a lot, like, why do you care, Hannah? Like, people assume I'm gay. Like, are you gay? Is that why you care about inclusion? What, I have to be gay to care about inclusion? Or I have to be married to a person of colour? Like, honestly, the questions I get asked are ridiculous, that people are like trying to work out why I care. I care because this is the right thing to do for people. And actually, like, everyone should deserve to have that feeling of belonging. And I think a lot of people, including me at points in my life, have taken that for granted and haven't had to think about it and haven't been exposed to it. But I think through my English teaching career, what I've read, where I've studied, where I've taught, I've been exposed to things that perhaps some of my counterparts haven't been. But I want to be part of the solution to the problem. And so for me, there is a place to be there, but I'm always mindful of who I am and when to step back and when not to do the talking, and when to like yield the floor for somebody else.
Yeah, no, for sure. You talk with real self-awareness, and I know we're working with you, Hannah, that you definitely do that. There's awareness of what privilege is and what your privileges are. And that's an interesting word in itself, actually, privilege. Help us to understand what that actually means, privilege.
So I use the word of power and privilege as a visual for this. And again, it's a bit provocative. Not everyone likes it, but it helps you to give, like for you to have a visual to think about how the different identity pieces that make you you, how some of them give you power and privilege, and how some of them potentially marginalize you. And it gives you a visual to consider how some people have multiple layers of privilege or multiple layers of potential marginalization. And it really upsets people, particularly if you're a straight white man and you find yourself in the centre of the wheel. But I always say, like, this might jar you. Let's talk about why it's jarring you. And I'll share, like, I find myself quite central on this, apart from a couple of traits. And I don't think that I have privilege because I haven't got children, but there's a perception that you're privileged, you haven't got kids. Like, I don't think that's a privilege. Like, actually unpicking what we mean by privilege and the different optics around these things. So how I define privilege in a kind of a shortcut is it's not what you're born into body-wise, postcode-wise, family-wise. It's what you have or haven't experienced. So my privilege is I have never experienced racism, Islamophobia, ableism, transphobia, like the list goes on. None of those things have harmed me, held me back, marked me. So that's my privilege. Hannah gets to get up every morning and go to work and just like crack on. Whereas the awareness I bring to a lot of the training I do, particularly for like governors and SLT, is that some people walk through the door at 9 o'clock and they've already experienced 12 microaggressions. Like, where's the compassion and the understanding for how that impacts them and their ability to perform? So I think that's how I kind of like expose it and start a conversation about it.
Right, that helps. That makes sense. I like that definition. And so you can have partial privilege, and even if you're a white middle-class male, that, like you say, there might be some partial privilege there.
But there could also be partial marginalisation there. That's an
Yes.
interesting one, where some, like, particularly in the wake of George murder, when a lot of white men didn't quite know where to fit in the conversation. They felt like there was they weren't invited to the conversation. And I had a lot of people reach out to me who I know quite well, saying, like, Hannah, I get the fact I've got a lot of privilege, but like my barrier is I've got a really strong regional accent. And every time I go to a headship interview, I get told, can you go for elocution lessons? So on paper, they look privileged, but they open their mouths and that's their barrier. Other men who perhaps were brought up in a disadvantaged area or family didn't have some of the access to resources that some of their counterparts have. So I do always say we've got to be really mindful about how we see people and how we judge people on face value, because not everybody who sits in this part of the wheel, wherever you are, it feels like they experience that privilege or feel like they experience that marginalisation. It's all contextual.
Yeah.
So I think there's more nuance to it than perhaps some of those diagrams present.
And is that kind of the train of thought that you go down when I'm sure you've had things said to you along the lines of how can white males be privileged and have power when a large majority of suicides are from that demographic? If you look at the education sector and achievement rates, white middle class boys are all underachieving. What's your response to when? Yeah, go on.
No,
Yeah.
absolutely. With that, isn't it? That's why you have to be really careful about like lumping people into one category and assuming that everyone in that category experiences life in the same way. We have got to like be more nuanced and more careful with how we hold that data and how we handle that data. Because like when I'm running training with sixth formers, I quite often get asked to do training now with like the DIB champions or advocates in a Key Stage 4, Key Stage 5 kind of setting. Like going to a private school, boarding school, and I have 12, 16 beautiful human beings, but half of them are privileged white straight boys who want to be allies in their school and are absolutely committed to helping to bring awareness and to be part of the solution. But they also ask me really vulnerable questions, such as, Hannah, do you think I'll get into university? Is it going to be hard for me to get a job? Because it now feels like the whole world is designed for inclusion of everyone else apart from us. And it feels like we're being punished because our granddad and our dad and our uncle had doors opened for them. So will doors be shut for us? And that's a really vulnerable and honest thing for young men to say. Like, we want to do better and be part of the solution, but we're also really fearful of our futures. So I think that that's where the conversation needs to be much deeper and wider. And I'm always really careful about like trying to bring people into the conversation rather than offsiding them away from the conversation. Because I think that's where a lot of the conversations go wrong. They become really divisive and people almost get pushed out. Like, we need straight, white, able-bodied Christian men who are head teachers and chairs of governors to be part of the solution, but they need to be conscious of who they are when they show up in that space and how their presence impacts other people as well.
Yes. And maybe sometimes they feel like they've got to shrink and shut up, and it's not that, isn't it? Like, I guess, do you do that training on you can still have a voice and share your opinions and be mindful of your privilege at the same time?
Yeah, like I'm a really confident, extroverted person. I'm really aware of how many times I talk in a meeting, on a Zoom call, who's taught and who's not taught. I think like power dynamics in spaces really need to be paid attention to. And we did a bit of work when I was head. My SLT and I were looking at Odyssey. So we're looking at classroom interaction. And we were a co-ed school, but a boy heavy. and the girls weren't getting a word in classrooms. And we did a big project around equity of voice and contribution in lessons. But then when we changed our gaze to look at meetings, it was exactly the same problem. We had powerful women leaders who were not getting a word in meetings because the men were dominating. So I think it's things like that. Like you can have influence and you can contribute by being the person to say, oh, Yasmin, we've not heard from you yet. Would you like to contribute? Like, so for me, like there's ways that you can be aware of who you are and you can help to facilitate that space and create greater equity and awareness in that space without being the person dominating that space. But it does take, like you say, a lot of self-awareness and a lot of training. And I do think the coaching training I've been on over the last few years has really helped me be a better listener, a better questioner. And I always say that settings, whether it's a school or a corporate space, that have a coaching culture will find DIB work easier because they're already more curious, they're already active listeners, they're already better at giving and receiving feedback. So you've kind of got a really strong foundational culture there to then do the hard work on. Whereas the settings who want to dive into doing work on quite sort of like sensitive, politicized topics, like you need to establish the behaviours and the culture and the space to do that in first.
Oh, that makes sense. I like that link with coaching because essentially coaching behaviors and skills are inclusive, make people feel belong and safe, for sure. You know, the work you're doing is so important as you're talking more and more about it. And I wonder, before, if someone's listening, perhaps they want some training from you. Before they get to that stage, I know you've got a plethora of resources on your website that I've had a look at again today. Is there a sort of, if someone's thinking, oh, I need to tackle this in my organization as a leader, is there a key resource or part on your website that you could say, right, go to this first? And if so, what is it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's probably two tools on there. The blog. So over the last 5 years, I've published 660 blogs, I think it is. So I mean, the community love writing. They want their voice to be heard. So I'm constantly harvesting people to blog, but also tapping people on the shoulder who I know who are doing brilliant work, who are a bit too shy to blog. So they write it, I then publish it, and I then put it out because we've got quite a big network. So I try to publish 2 blogs a week, and they are all published on our website, but you can search by theme. So if you want a blog on psychological safety, I think there's like 10 blogs on psychological safety. And my rule is a bit like your rule with the podcast being short, like 500 words. No one's got time to read more than 500 words. Don't send me a thesis. So it needs to be like short, sharp, practical, or reflective. So I think that's a nice one for like little and often just reflecting and engaging and sharing with someone else. And then the deeper work is that we've got, I think we're at 43 DIB toolkits. So we do so much training and people have limited time, resources, money, and they often get left like wanting to know more because they didn't know what they didn't know. So over the last 4 or 5 years, I've been commissioning people with lived experience to curate the learning. So all the toolkits are formatted in the same way. So our new toolkit last month was on mixed race identities. So I'd gone to a brilliant book launch from the half of it, a great podcast that Emma and Nicole run. We were talking in the Q&A about mixed race children and their experience in the schools. So I reached out to Louisa Marcus, who run Mix Ed, one of the grassroots charities, and said, would you like to collaborate with us and do a toolkit? So that then has key information to know, key questions to ask yourself and others. And normally it's like 6 blogs, 6 articles, 6 podcasts, 6 TED Talks. Off the back of the mixed race one going live and going out on LinkedIn last month, I had some international teachers reach out to say, could we help you do one on third culture kids? Because a massive thing out in international schools is those children, usually children of expats who have moved around quite a lot and they have multiple sort of anchors to their identity. So that went live on Monday this week. So they're there to help the people do a deeper dive into a theme, and they're all completely free. But then we often then get an email from someone, I love that blog, that toolkit was really helpful, can you do some training on? And it kind of like then spawns the kind of the other support that we can offer.
Oh, wow. So much to get stuck into. I'm particularly curious on the mixed race resources because I've not seen anything like that out there. And I consider myself mixed race, and we're a bit of an anomaly in terms of how people approach, like, oh, what, oh, you know, what your name, like you look, you know, that's what I've had all my life.
It's the fastest growing racial group in the UK. So I think I get the statistics right. It's something like 1 in 4 children in a primary school national average are mixed race biracial. So, do you mean it's going to become a bigger and bigger representative group? And I think we're barely talking about race. We're definitely not thinking about colorism enough. And I just don't think that schools are thinking about the experience of their mixed race children, families and staff enough. And you're right, it's a very unique experience. And you're often othered in 2 or 3 ways. So actually, when we think about belonging and sort of like coexisting in multiple spaces or being othered and excluded from multiple spaces, I just think it's a topic we need to think about. So Emma and Nicole, who run the podcast, The Half of It. No, sorry, it's the mixed podcast. The book's called The Half of It. Emma's got a children's book coming out in the spring. So I actually had a call with her publisher this week, and we're going to run a webinar with them in the spring, because I don't think there's many children's books that centre a mixed race child.
Amazing. Oh, that's so exciting. I must tell my brother and my sister so that they can tap into it for their children. Amazing. Hannah, keep doing the amazing work that you're doing. It's very much needed. And thank you so much for your time today.
Having me. And I love the podcast name and theme. That's why I'm here.
Oh, thanks, Hannah. Take care. Thank you for listening to Women Disrupting. I'm Yasmin Arif, reminding you that change doesn't come to those who wait, but to those who act. If today's episode lit a fire in you, share your thoughts and the stories that moved you. Let's turn inspiration into momentum, because disruption doesn't end here. Join us next time as we continue to challenge, connect, and create a better world together.